Have you ever thought about who owns everything? And when I say everything, I mean everything. Like, this is some like Illuminati type conspiracy. Because if you went out on the street and you asked somebody who owns these big corporations, they would obviously say, well, the CEO owns them. That's the guy pulling the strings. But in this video, we uncover that might not be the case. They might be the mere puppets being controlled from the back of the curtain by the one true puppet master, the true deep state. So follow along with me on this journey as we slowly uncover who or what is behind that curtain. This video is a story onto something previously thought as impossible. Now, the information that I'm about to bless you with will completely change and alter the way you view the world. An event of this magnitude is usually called a black swan event. And now, you may ask yourself, what is a black swan event? And when this term was first coined, it was presumed that the black swan didn't exist until eventually, of course, it was discovered. But the importance of this metaphor lies in its analogy to the very fragility of any system of thought. But you might be asking yourself, what is an example of a black swan event? And events like the financial crisis of 2008, natural disasters like Katrina, or that one little thing that happened in September of 2001. But I'm gonna be the first to tell you, we will not be talking about any of those. Instead, we'll start our journey all the way back in 2021. So let's get started. Now, one of my guilty pleasures are conspiracy theories, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't a believer in most of them. But one day I was scrolling through a stock market subreddit when I found this one post by a guy named Sliver12. This was in relation to the big GameStop short of 2021. This time period really shined a light on corporate manipulation within the stock market, and it really opened a lot of people's eyes, causing them to research this topic further. And one of those people that found themselves digging deeper was Sliver12. His research to the core, while completely unrelated to the whole GameStop situation. So if you're tired of hearing about that, don't worry. This video is not about that. Don't click off. But what this video is truly about is ownership. It dives deep into the question of who really truly owns these companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, Bank of America, and even Petco. Now, let's skip forward to a couple of months, and this Reddit user's post soon become a full website. And I will of course link this website below if you want to go read through it, but there's a warning because it is 600 pages, and so if you don't want to read it, I will highlight most of the information that is covered and of course add on to that. But I do want to send a big shout out to Sliver12 for sparking my interest in this topic and also help guiding my research along and making some very neat graphs for this video. But enough about me, right? I think it's time we finally start uncovering the true corruption that a lot of these corporations are allegedly doing. So without further ado, welcome to the game of Megaopoly. Now, unless you shop at Walmart, Costco, or Amazon exclusively, which, hey, no judgments, but you most likely buy your clothes from only one store, your groceries from another, and your electronic devices from a third. Maybe you even buy these consumables at multiple different stores in each category. All of these different retailers and brands obviously have nothing in common, and oftentimes they are fierce competitors. But now, if you're a smart shopper like me, you find the stores with the best prices, each hawking their wages with ads and sales, all vying with each other for our hard-earned cash. And when we aren't shopping or working, we spend a fair bit of our free time watching shows on competing stations or the online equivalent like Netflix and Hulu. And don't forget, we read our news through a plethora of competing news sites that are trying to get us excited with these eye-popping clickbait headlines. Kind of why you click this video. Or we could even be interacting with our friends and relatives in the world at large through games, social media platforms, or other interactive social sites. But now, you may ask yourself, are these really different companies competing for your time and money in a free market full of original ideas and products? Or has the entire concept of a competitive market and the free flow of information and trade become nothing more than a game of pretend we, as consumers, are forced to play? Does this free market really encourage any innovator to introduce their ideas for public judgment, or does judgment come along before the public even knows about an innovation? And some examples being naked shorting, biotech cancer research startups, or EV tech companies. There are certain investment firms such as BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street Corporation, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Fidelity, and Northern Trust Corp who have purchased large percentages of stock in every single company in America that has a big enough name to make a blip on their radar. And many have yet to do so. And when you add up the ownership of all of these investment firms into any random production or retail company, it totals anywhere from a very large minority of 40% plus all the way up to nearly 100%. But let's take a look at two examples, Intel Corp and AMD. Other companies own up to around 63% and 67% of these two corporations. As you can see, Vanguard holds $17.9 billion of shares in Intel and $8.9 billion of shares in AMD. This is a lot, to say the least, and it's very concerning. But to fully grasp what this truly means, we need to take a look into the three different categories of stock ownership. First of all is institutional, which is basically just a big investment firm like BlackRock, Vanguard Group, etc., etc., etc. And second, we have an insider, and this ownership has two subcategories. A person or insider is a natural person or a trust that we think of as being the owners of a company. An example would be Jeff Bezos for Amazon. These are people who have special access to information regarding the corporation that the average person doesn't have. The other category of insider is an insider corporation, which is a corporate entity that is affiliated, legally speaking, which means it too has special access to information before it becomes publicly available. And finally, last but not least, we have retail. Retail ownership is just random people like you or me who own a piece, a share, or even hundreds of shares of a company that we simply like. Some of the institutional ownership is tied up in funds, but the majority of this ownership is in long-term investment. Now, this not only gives these investment firms collectively a majority share in equity and profits, but also in voting rights. For the vast majority of the companies we buy from, these institutions have, if taken together, the majority voting rights to decide who runs the company and how they handle their assets. Or put somewhat more simply, BlackRock owns more Vanguard than Vanguard owns of itself, and Vanguard owns more BlackRock than BlackRock owns of itself. Now, it's a lot more complex than this, but I'm just trying to simplify this to get the point across. And whether or not they use those voting rights to make decisions for these companies is not the focus of this chapter. I am only pointing out that the ownership trail suggests that they can if they really want to. But what we're really diving into is stock ownership. I'll be examining who owns the actual stock in a company, the people who have the voting rights and the dividend rights in a company as a result of that stock ownership, which some of the more important decisions a company makes are based on a democracy of sorts. In the case of a company with sole ownership, that single person makes all of the decisions. You can think of a sole proprietorship like a company with one stock share, and one person holds that share, even if it isn't formally set up in the Articles of Incorporation. Now, if it's two people with equal ownership, say a husband and wife bakery, for example, then these are two votes. Whether or not those two votes are really equal in that case is not the point. I'm not gonna sit here and try to tell a married couple how much better each partner is supposed to put on their respective muffins. The point is that legally, they are supposed to be weighted equally, unless explicitly stated otherwise in the Articles of Incorporation. But now, in the case of a publicly traded corporation or any private corporation with multiple shares, each share gets an equal vote unless explicitly stated otherwise. So a person who owns, let's say, 10 shares gets 10 votes on any official corporate vote, such as who is CEO, who sits on the board of directors, management of certain assets, direction of the company, and so forth. Therefore, if a person or entity owns 1 million shares, they get 1 million votes. Once we start looking at the boards of directors of these corporations, the nuances of this legal structure of control changes a bit. But that's a topic for a later video. I will be primarily focusing on American or American-based international companies, but this institutional ownership is not restricted to just these. By looking at the investment data, since each large company is primarily owned by most of the same investment firms, it would be reasonable to assume that the real competition is in the investment firms themselves. It is they who compete with each other for profits and argue over who gets which part of the market. They fight with each other over which stores and which brands get to rise to the top and who gets shorted out of existence, which is pretty controlling if you ask me. All of the investment groups that I listed previously, and every single one of those not listed that I have been able to find records for, including all privately owned, all own just as much of shares of each other as they do in all other world's corporations. Here are just a few examples. By all appearances, at least on the large scale, the connectivity of the investment firm network seems to be very close, for all nodes are directly connected to all nodes, a big black spider web of corporations. This shared ownership seems shocking. At least it shocked the shit out of me. But the full implications aren't obvious without some analysis. I will start with a simple math example, and don't you worry, it really is simple. Let's say I own an investment company named Money Inc. I'm now competing for investor money with my friend Benny, who owns Fat Money. Down the street is a former friend of ours named Kenny. He owns Money Castle. Kenny is short, has a speech impediment, and steals some of our customers sometimes. But now, on the edge of our juicy little town, there's a really nice, big, fat company named Hanky Poo. And I want to invest in Hanky Poo. I really like the stock, so I buy 20% of the company. Now, me being a good friend, I tell Benny about it, and he agrees with my assessment. He buys 20% as well. Now, unfortunately, Kenny got wind and buys up another 20%. As much as I don't like Kenny, he does have a nose for investment opportunities. Hanky Poo now has 60% institutional ownership. Combined, our ownership gives us a lot of control over what kind of shit goes on at the company if we choose to use our pool of leverage. Though there is little apparent motivation for us to work together since we are obviously competitors. Now, the rest of the town loves Hanky Poo. They seem to think that his shit doesn't stink and scoops up another 20% of the retail. Hank decides to keep 20% of the stock in-house or insider. Here are the ownership maps of what these four companies would look like. Now, with this same theme in mind, let's do some more buying. And now our graphs look a little something like this. While I may still be CEO of my company, Money Inc., I have to respect that I have a broader interest now. It behooves me to coordinate and work with both Benny and, sadly, Kenny, since it's really difficult to tell by stock ownership anyways who owns which company, because on paper it looks like we all just own each other. But as far as how invested we are in both each other and Hanky Poo, we might as well be one company with 3 different investor doors and 1 retail door. Now, if Hanky Poo does well, and we will sure as hell make sure it does, with gift bags at Christmas time, we will have plenty of money to invest in other companies in the same manner, all coordinating for the best interest of each other and, of course, the corporations we deem worthy. But now, for any companies that we don't like, maybe just because they won't sell their controlling interest, or we just think they suck, we'll have the capital to short them out of existence. Any competition to the corporations we own gets deleted if they choose not to join us. If they play ball, they can join our little free market. All we need to do is ensure a dominant victory, and our little version of capitalism is a little help from the media to drive appropriate emotional responses from the public. And now our little friends at the media will either lead them towards a company or away from it with selective advertising. And it's a really good thing that our companies already own the local newspaper. With this example in mind, let's take a look at a map of percent ownership of a few different investment companies. Let's start with BlackRock, the largest institutional investor in the entire world. When you walk up to the door, BlackRock looks like this. Now, this is a big badass company, and Larry Fink is the all-powerful deity in control of assets worth almost half of America's GDP. But does Larry really own BlackRock? When you look into the actual ownership of the voting rights equity, it looks like this. Now, to me personally, it kind of looks like Merrill Lynch owns BlackRock for the most part, isn't it? Isn't it interesting that BlackRock only owns 6.5% of BlackRock? Hell, even Vanguard owns more. But this is merely an illusion, as Merrill Lynch is a wholly owned subsidiary of Bank of America. So, technically, Bank of America is the real owner of this mega machine. Well, not really, because Bank of America, you guessed it, doesn't actually own Bank of America. And when I add the actual ownership of Merrill Lynch into the tree map, it looks like this. And so, if you are a bit confused with this crazy graph, I understand. But what we're really doing is separating the shares of ownership that other companies have in BlackRock, which you saw in the first picture. But with this picture, what we are doing is digging deeper. We are now taking Merrill Lynch and separating it into who owns Merrill Lynch. And so we're seeing multiple corporations having a massive investment share in other companies. If you look a little closer, you begin to see that the retail or the average investors like you and me are in white, and we own basically nothing. However, an interesting thing that we see when we expand this graph is that BlackRock actually owns more BlackRock than we previously thought through their ownership of Merrill Lynch. Quite a bit of BlackRock is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, but you guessed it, this apparent ownership is still an illusion, since all of the other companies besides Merrill Lynch and Bank of America are also owned by other corporations. If I fill out the rest of the map with their ownership, it looks like this. But now, get ready, because this is when it starts to get very, very chaotic. If you took a quick little glance at this graph and are very, let's say, lost, don't worry, because I was too. But basically, what we've done is separate BlackRock into all of the different companies and their percentage of ownership within the company. We then took it a further step and broke down those companies that have a share in BlackRock, and then we separated them down by who owns those companies. So basically what we did to BlackRock is what we're doing to the other companies that own BlackRock within BlackRock. But now, if you think we're done, you're mistaken. No. We aren't, because there's always a deeper part of the iceberg. And if I fill in all of these companies with their ownership, it now looks like this. And believe it or not, but as you keep filling in the ownership further and further and further, it eventually gets below the resolution of the screen, or even your eye, or the wavelength of light. But now I'm here to make things a bit simpler. I will be using 3 colors: white, gray, and black. Let's now take a look at BlackRock with the simplified map. Welcome to BlackRock. The name is certainly fitting, since I'm looking at a lot of black. In this map, the white represents retail investors, the gray represents non-institutional insider investment, or the actual people we think of as the company's owners. The black represents the big, bad, mega machine, or what I like to say, megacorp. The black shows that as you continually apply the voting stock ownership to each layer above it, you eventually cannot distinguish the colors of the individual corporations that hold the stock. The black for BlackRock is effectively the same as a black for Vanguard, which is the same as a black for First State Street Corporation, which is the same as a black for Fidelity, and etc. It's all one corporation as a function of the voting stock ownership map. But now, we've run into a bit of a problem. After I did all of this research, I soon realized that in 2008, Merrill Lynch exchanged a large portion of their voting stock for non-voting stock, aka preferred stock, which removed their voting rights in BlackRock in compliance with a violation of the Advisors Act. And this act states, also skip ahead to the number on the screen if you don't care about government words. I think this applies because ML, or Merrill Lynch, which I'll be referring to them as ML, just because it's less of a tongue twister and less words. But anyway, I think this applies because ML is an advisor, solicitor, and a partner and didn't follow procedures for such a combination. This is what the SEC report in 2010 on this violation has to say. And not to be specific, but this is in page 3 on number 4, so you can't say I made this up. Also skip ahead if you don't want to read it. So what this is saying is they never use the independent solicitor disclosure procedure. So presumably they could have just used the correct procedure during solicitation, but instead ML decided to give up their voting stock. And according to that report, they simply exchanged voting stock for non-voting stock straight across. And you can find this in page 3, number 3. But I'll give you another timestamp so you can skip ahead if you don't want to hear more government worded documents because it is kind of painful. But if you want to see the source, it's a doozy. You can read it. I'll link it below. Now, this is a bit of a red flag because Merrill Lynch gave up 40% plus of their voting stock in exchange for equal value non-voting stock. That's 40% of the voting stock in the most powerful company in the world in exchange for nothing. ML gave that up because of a procedural violation that could have presumably been easily rectified by following procedure with disclosure of an ML or BR partnership during solicitations, which is what I think. But like I said earlier, I'll link the official SEC report of this exchange agreement in the description, but I mean, it says the same thing. They exchanged these stocks directly. I scanned the document and I simply could not find any further compensation. Now, who the hell gives up 40% of the voting stock in the most powerful company in the world in exchange for nothing? Someone for whom that exchange doesn't matter. Who could it possibly not matter to? Would it matter to you? Would you give up 40% plus of the voting stock in the most powerful company in the world for nothing? That is tremendous power, unconceivable power, but they gave it up with nearly a shrug. To me, this provides further evidence for the concept of this mega corp as a single entity, because it wouldn't matter to give up that much power if you aren't really giving it up. If such power is already shared across the board, if it is already contained by a single entity, shuffling around a few numbers just becomes meaningless. So what does this do to the ownership map? And so this map was made by reducing Merrill Lynch's position to 4.6% and adjusting all of them to fit 100%. Can you point to the company that owns BlackRock, other than the minor pattern variations which are mostly due to how the algorithm sorts the largest contributors? Can you really truly see a difference? It's the next day. So, how about them Bears? Your boy's a bit hung like a horse, but that's besides the point. What is in the point is the fact that this is a 3-part series. Hungover montage. All right, we are back. So it's been a couple days and I've sat on this research and I have thought about it a lot, but I want to start out with an example, right? So let's say you have a dog, right? And you need to feed this dog. And so you go to Walmart, Petco, any of these stores, and you buy just some basic like Purina dog food. I think that's the most popular one. But what you don't know is that when you're buying that Purina and you're giving your money to this company, you don't know that that company is actually owned by General Mills. They aren't investing this money in the way that you thought. It's not a trickle-down economic system like a certain president once said. It's more of a trickle up. And so once you give them that money, you'll never see it again. But instead of this big company, you know, paying their employees or doing good with the money that you've given them, what they are actually doing is something called stock buybacks. And so what a stock buyback is a company that is buying their own shares, which in the long term is actually reducing the number of publicly traded shares in the free market, therefore inflating the price of that stock. And you won't believe it, but this was actually illegal until 1982 when a certain president wanted to full send capitalism. And I've got a couple thoughts about this because the stock buybacks are getting very popular recently, and I've noticed people have been saying we're in a vibe recession to where inflation is up, the quality of life is down, but the stock market isn't down at all. And so I think this is because of the stock buybacks. But while we're on the topic of right now, General Mills actually in 2024 bought back $2 billion worth of their own stock, which is up from last year or in 2023 when they bought $1.4 billion. That is a very stark increase in purchase. So you might say, well, if these companies are doing these stock buybacks, well, why don't I just buy the stock? I mean, it's free money. It's like an infinite money glitch, right? In reality, it's not really gonna affect you at all because we have to really look at who owns these stocks, which I conveniently just talked about in the first part of this video. So we all know that other big corporations own a majority of the stocks of other big corporations. It's really only making the mega corporations richer. Oh, and a little fun factoid for you. Who owns the most stock in General Mills? Vanguard, who we have talked about quite a bit in this video. And I just want to put this statistic in perspective for you because the top 10% of Americans financially, based on net worth, they own 93% of the stocks being traded. 93%. That is an over majority of the actual free market. And that leaves the bottom 50% of Americans owning just 1% of the stock market. Half of Americans, 50% of Americans have about a 1% say and 1% of control of this free market. Oh, and the CEO pay ratio is something like 350 to 1. So for every $1 you make at your part-time or full-time job, the CEO is making $350. The biggest part of this is CEOs mainly get paid in stock. Since the 80s, we have seen a huge increase in CEO pay. Also, look at this drink. I'm trying to be like healthier and stuff, and I'm drinking like this green drink. Shit's ass. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know if I want to be healthy anymore. After all of this information, where are we left? And I truly believe we're at a very different point in history where we're seeing the wealthiest people in human history, period. Where there is a group of these oligarchs that are running everything and they have all of the money. They have control of 93% of the market. How is that a free market? But also, I truly believe that these corporations are getting bigger than the government. BlackRock alone owns assets that are half of America's GDP. With these think tanks, especially these think tanks, they really like to push legislation. And you know, the more money you have, the more voice you have. And with the FEC versus the Supreme Court, that basically decided that corporations are people too, and they have freedom of speech. And that is very scary. And so this is when it gets a little bit kooky. This is when the tinfoil hats come on. But I think that the future of this one world order isn't gonna be a government-controlled state. I think the true tyranny of a controlling class will be the big corporations. They will be the ones controlling government, controlling people, controlling legislation, and controlling what you consume. They will have control over every single aspect of your life. And it will just be a handful of the most powerful men in the world controlling everything about you. They can literally determine what you buy. So if that's not the deep state, I don't know what is. Which actually, speaking of deep state, check the shirt. I actually made the shirt just for this series. And if you want to buy it, I'll put the link below. If you want to support me, you don't have to, but I like the shirt. I think it's cool. I kind of ripped it from Adult Swim, but I'm here editing this and I realized that I did not film an outro for this. So like and subscribe. share with 50 people. Thank you for your time.
Huh?